Hello everybody, welcome to the video. My name is Midway and today we're going to be doing a very beginner friendly guide for Holy Paladin for those kind of people that are just getting started with the spec or are interested in picking it up, maybe going into season 4 or just re-rolling mains for whatever reason. So we're going to be covering the very core aspects of the spec on how you're supposed to play Holy Paladin. Now, before we go any further, I got guides for Mythic Plus and for rating for Holy Paladin for Season 3 and patch 9.2.5. Those guides are also going to be standing going into Season 4 because nothing's changing as far as we know for Holy Paladin. So if you're interested in that kind of content, much more specific for Mythic Plus or for rating as well as much more in-depth for those kind of content, please go ahead and check those guides. They're going to be linked down in the description of this video. And now let's just get into the beginner guide. So as I mentioned before on the introduction, we're going to be keeping this as simple as possible and we're going to be starting talking about Holy Power generation and Holy Power spending. So as Holy Paladins, we have a resource, it's called Holy Power, and we can build all the way up to 5 Holy Power, and then we can spend that Holy Power through a certain set of abilities. So we have three generator spells that are going to give us some Holy Power, 3 core to the spec generator abilities. There's going to be other ways of generating Holy Power, but we'll talk about those later. So for the very core aspect that every Holy Paladin is going to have, regardless of talents, regardless of whatever race they are, there's going to be those 3 spells, and those are going to be, first of all, Holy Shock. It's going to be our most important spell to keep on cooldown always. I repeat, you always want to keep Holy Shock on cooldown first before anything else. And it's going to give us 1 Holy Power, it's going to be doing some damage if we use it on an enemy, and it's going to be doing some healing if we use it on an ally. And the whole reason why we want to be using it first before anything else is because it's going to be doing some healing as well as give us 1 Holy Power. Every other generator is not going to do any healing, and as a healer we want to be doing some healing, so we always use Holy Shock first. Now, second generator is going to be Crusader Strike. It's going to be an ability that we need to be on melee for, and that's the whole reason why we are a melee healer, is because we need to be hitting something with this on melee. It's going to give us 1 Holy Power as well as do a little bit of damage, and it has 2 charges, so we want to make sure we try to never let it go all the way to 2 stacks. Now, our last generator we're going to be talking about is Hammer of Wrath. This is a finisher ability that can only be used whenever we have Wings active or whenever the target is below 20% HP. So whenever we have Wings active, you can see I can now use Hammer of Wrath. It's a range ability, we can use it at a 30-yard range, and it's going to give us 1 Holy Power as well as do a little bit of damage. However, it's going to be doing more damage than a Crusader Strike would do. So if we can, we would always be using a Hammer of Wrath before we would be using a Crusader Strike. So the whole idea behind the priority list to what spells we want to be using first when it comes strictly to generator abilities would be, first of all, you want to be keeping Holy Shock on cooldown. Secondly, if you have Hammer of Wrath, you want to be using that whenever possible. And thirdly, you want to be using Crusader Strike whenever you need to generate some Holy Power, and try to never let it go all the way to 2 stacks. Next up, let's talk about our spender abilities. We have a total of 3 spender abilities. Those are going to be all consuming 3 Holy Power every time we use them, and they are the following. First, we're going to be talking about Word of Glory. That is our single target heal. It's going to be doing some healing on 1 target, and it's going to be the ability you're going to be using by default on Mythic Plus and PvP. Next up, we have Light of Dawn. It's our AoE heal, and it's going to be doing some healing up to 5 allies on a 15-yard range frontal cone. So as you can see, I use it here, and you can see I hit all those players in front of me. They get their healing effect onto them. Now, this ability is going to be targeting first allies that have taken some damage, so they are not full HP. However, it's not going to be going first for those that are the lowest HP. It's just going to be targeting people that are not full HP first. So it can do quite some overhealing depending on your luck. Basically, it's a bit of an RNG who the ability chooses to heal and who doesn't. So we usually use Light of Dawn by default in raiding content, and the reason for that is because in raids we are almost always going to be hitting 5 people. However, in Mythic Plus or PvP, that's not going to be the case. So if we do not hit up to 4 or more people with Light of Dawn, it's going to be doing less healing than if we would have used a Word of Glory instead. So yeah, we use Word of Glory by default in Mythic Plus and PvP, and we use Light of Dawn by default in raids. Now we have one other spender ability, and that is Shield of the Righteous. Shield of the Righteous is going to be an ability that we are going to be using mainly whenever we want to be doing some AoE damage in Mythic Plus, And the way it works is we position ourselves and it's going to be doing some frontal cone AoE damage. As you can see there, I use it and I can hit all those 3 target damage. I do a little bit of damage to them. It has uncapped AoE, so you can do as much damage as you can whenever there's just a big bunch of mobs. And it's also going to give you a big defensive buff of a big bunch of armor. In my case, it's giving me 4,131 armor. That's a lot of armor. It's almost going to be making you a tank for a little while. So it can only be used as a defensive. Now, the way you use this ability, as I said, is by default whenever you do not need any holy power for healing. Everybody's stopped up in Mythic Plus and you do not know what to do with your holy power. That's when you can choose to go for a Shield of the Righteous, and in that case do a little bit of AoE damage. Now, let me tell right now that we are talking about the very core aspects of the spec once again. So we're not considering things like tier sets or any other things that might shape or might shake around whatever we're talking about here. There's going to be a lot more nuance to the way you use every single one of these spells in many different situations. But for now, to keep it plain and simple, as I already said, Word of Glory for Mythic Plus and for PvP, Ladon for raiding, and Shield of the Righteous if you want to be doing some AoE damage, mainly in Mythic Plus, or if you want to be using it as well as a defensive. So now that we covered generating holy power, we covered spending holy power, the whole idea behind the spec is to do this whole process as fluid as we can. So we're gonna be there on melee, using our spells, using our holy shocks, using our Crusader Strike, using our Hammer of Wrath, and we're gonna be getting some holy power. Then we're gonna be thinking about how we want to be using that holy power. If it's raid, we're going to be using Ladon by default. We're going to be doing some healing to everybody in front of us like that. If we are doing Mythic Plus or we're doing PvP, then we would be going for Words of Glory instead, healing those individual targets that are taking a lot of damage. So that is the basic core way that the whole spec works. Now there's other spells into this mix. There is Judgment and there is also Consecration. So let's mention those a little bit. Judgment is just going to be doing some damage to one target. On itself, it doesn't do any healing and it doesn't give any holy power. So we want to fit this spec, or rather this spell, whenever we can. However, it doesn't have the same priority as those spells that are able to generate some holy power. So it is not that important. Now there is talent that is going to make Judgment to do some healing. Whenever we use it, it's going to apply a debuff and people are going to be able to consume this debuff off of the enemy. And whenever they consume the debuff, they can get some healing done to themselves. So it doesn't do zero healing. However, on itself, since it doesn't generate any holy power, we usually give it a lower priority than any other generator spell in our toolkit. Now, Consecration is going to be a different story. It doesn't do any healing as well. However, in this case, there is no talent that makes it do any healing. It's just going to be doing some uncapped AoE damage. And for that reason, we consider it to be as only a damage ability. In Mythic Plus, it's going to be much more important because it does uncapped AoE, and it's going to be our main source of damage in Mythic Plus. However, for raids or for PvP, it has a pretty limited use. Now, Consecration can do some healing with certain conduit. However, nowadays we don't really play that conduit, so we usually use Consecration when we have literally nothing else to press, nothing else to do. It's our dead last option when it comes to raiding and when it comes to PvP. In Mythic Plus, however, it's going to be a whole different story. And I have a video on it, you can go and check that out as well. I'll probably link it somewhere up there. It's going to be our main damage source. However, for the whole idea of how to use the spells for the core toolkit of Holy Paladin, it's going to be the last thing we want to be pressing. If you were just doing some damage, and the whole idea of, or the whole way you would play this is you would keep Holy Shock on cooldown. Again, Holy Shock on cooldown first, always, then Hammer of Wrath on cooldown, then Crusader Strike on cooldown, and then we would use Judgments, and then dead last, if we have nothing else to press, that's when we will go for a Consecration, like right there, where we just throw it whenever we have nothing else that we have available. Of course, in the whole mix, we would be spending that holy power. It's very important to never waste any holy power. If we have 5 holy power, the first thing we want to be doing is getting rid of it. It's using some spender before we generate any more. Wasting holy power is one of the biggest hurdles for new players that I've realized, and you should have your holy power very clearly tracked so you never go over 5, you never waste any of the holy power that you can generate. As I mentioned, the whole idea behind Holy Paladin is to generate as much holy power as you can and spend it as agilely as you can. So be as fluid as possible with generating the holy power and getting rid of it via spending it properly as best as you can, getting as much value from it as you can. Now, of course, there's a lot more parts to Holy Paladin. There's a lot more spells to consider, and I just got turned into a turkey. But let's talk about beacons. So, Holy Paladins, we have an ability that is called Beacon of Light. We can apply this buff to an ally, and you can see there they get this thing coming from their heads. It's a little bit of light, and that's indicating that they are buffed by our beacon. So the way beacon work is that if you do some healing to somebody else, not the beacon target, the healing we do to that other person is going to then be replicated onto our beacon targets. So therefore, we would then get extra healing done. Basically, we would be duplicating the amount of healing that we've done to that person would be then transferred at a percentage. Not the entire healing will be transferred, but a little bit of that healing would be transferred onto the beacon targets. So that's why we are considered a very strong single target healer, mainly tank healer, because we can transfer so much of the healing we do onto the raid or onto the group onto one target or more. Now, as you can see here, I have 2 beacons, and the reason for that is because there's a talent that allows you to have 2 beacons active at once, but each of the beacons then would transfer less amount of healing individually. However, of course, altogether, it would amount to more healing transferred through beacons than only having one single beacon. So usually we want to be playing this and use those 2 beacons onto both the tanks in raiding. We also use this in Mythic Plus, and we just put the second beacon onto somebody else. We have 1 beacon on the tank and another beacon onto ourselves or somebody else. And yeah, you always want to make sure you have your beacons up. I have weak auras that tell me whenever I don't have them, because if you do not use your beacons, you are missing a big chunk of Holy Paladin's healing power, and basically the whole idea behind them is to be very strong tank healers and spot healers. So yeah, you basically need to always keep your beacons up. They are very important. So we've talked about the whole idea of how Holy Paladin is supposed to work. To generate holy power following a rotation, some spells have higher priority than others, and then you want to be spending that holy power onto your spenders, depending on the situation, using one or the other, doing some healing and then transferring a lot of that healing through the beacons to make you a very strong tank healer, as well as some big spot healing coming from other aspects of our toolkit. But there's a lot more to the Holy Paladin toolkit on its own. There's a lot more spells, and I want to touch on some of them right now. So first, we have our own personal cooldown. That's going to be Divine Protection, 20% damage reduction on an 8-second, rather for 8 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. Very important if you can press this whenever you know you're going to be taking damage. It goes a long way as a player if you are just able to consistently use your personals all the time. Now, Devotion Aura is going to be our main aura that we're going to be using on PvE content. We can also buff these all the way to 15% damage reduction from 3% damage reduction for the entire raid or party if we are using Aura Mastery. So Aura Mastery is going to be our big raid cooldown. It's going to make us very welcome in raid environments, and it's a big part of the reason why Holy Paladins are so often brought to all the encounters in the Race to War First, because this buff, Aura Mastery, is just such a strong cooldown. A lot of cooldown of damage reduction with no positional requirements for so long. It's very strong. Also, we have our trusty All Blessings, Blessing of Freedom. It's going to be removing any roots or any slows, any snares. You're going to be using this situationally whenever you know you're going to be getting slowed, to prevent the slow from being applied, or the root, or just to make sure you're going to be able to remove such a slow or root quickly. Also, we have our BOP, Physical Damage Mitigation. It's basically an immunity, physical damage immunity. It's also able to remove some stuns depending on the nature of the stuns. Very situational as well, just know that it exists and it works with physical damage. And we also have our Blessing of Sacrifice, which is usually going to be considered as part of the tank's toolkit. If the tank is good enough, they will be able to call for that Blessing of Sacrifice whenever they need it. If they're not able to do so, they just don't do so, you don't communicate, whatever. It also makes you much better of a player if you're able to proactively use a Blessing of Sacrifice whenever you want to. It's gonna do 30% damage reduction onto an ally for 12 seconds, and it's going to transfer 75% of the damage prevented onto you. So there will be some damage taken as a return. The buff will be broken if you fall below 20% HP. So there's some nuance to that, the usage of this spell. However, usually we are not supposed to be worrying about the damage taken, and we just want to be using it for the damage reduction onto the ally that we're using it on. Now, we also have, of course, our own bubble. We want to use this whenever we know we're going to be screwed, or we just want to be skipping through some mechanics. And there's also the ability of Light of the Martyr. Many people do not know what to do about Light of the Martyr, especially new players. Light of the Martyr is an instant spell that heals somebody for a little bit and we take some of that damage or some damage as a return. So it doesn't do the most healing, however it's an insta spell. It doesn't have any cooldown, we can use it all the time, and we should not be spamming it, but it's supposed to be thought as a tool of like an oh shit button. If we do not have any insta heals for somebody, we just want to heal them immediately because they're in a desperate situation. We do not have Holy Shock ready because it's on cooldown. We do not have enough holy power to use a Word of Glory. We do not have Lay on Hands. We don't have anything. The only way we can actually save them would be through spamming Light of the Martyr. Then that's when you should be using this ability. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot more nuance to how this spell is supposed to work and be used. And a lot of it is going to have to do with legendaries and conduits and such, so we're not going to be touching those right now. We're just going to be thinking about the spells as part of the base toolkit. So for now, that's all I want to touch on these extra other spells. Let's move on to the talents. So as you might notice, there is a lot of talents, and if we talked about each one of them individually, would be here forever. Also, I don't want this to be a guide on what to pick when. If you are just interested in what you should pick on Mythic Plus or rating, I have whole guides on those things. So you can check those instead where I give my reasoning and I give you a list of what you should pick over there. Now here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be mentioning some of the talents that I think are the most important out of what we have available and just mention how they work and what makes them strong. So first, on the first row, all of them are sort of important and have been used in the past. Crusader Smite reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock whenever we use Crusader Strike on a target for a second. So this used to be very strong whenever Holy Shock was much more strong. And also whenever we had a lot of other interactions with Holy Shock, like for example, Glimmer of Light. Nowadays, we barely ever really use this because Holy Shock is just not that important in our whole toolkit. It is still our most important spell to keep on cooldown, but it just doesn't warrant picking this talent. Now, Light's Hammer is usually what we use on this talent. It's gonna throw something on the ground. It's gonna be doing some AoE healing and AoE damage for a little while for everything that's in there, in that the area where it's active. It does uncapped AoE healing and damage, so it's very useful in Mythic Plus for damage and also in rating for uncapped AoE healing. We usually use this basically on every PvE scenario nowadays. However, Bestow Faith is still a very, very strong option and we should very, very much consider using it. It's very used in PvP. It's basically a default option for PvP. And what this does, I cannot spec into it right now because Light's Hammer is on cooldown. What it does is it applies a buff onto an ally, and after a couple seconds, actually 5 seconds, it's gonna proc some healing on them and give us 1 holy power. So it also generates some holy power, and that's really why it's so strong, because it also contributes to getting more holy power to use on our spenders. Now moving on to the next row, I just want to talk a little bit about Judgment of Light. What this does is it transforms our Judgment from a pure single target damage ability that's not that important into the whole toolkit of Paladin, into something that actually does some healing. And what it does is it applies a debuff onto whatever target we're using Judgment on, and this debuff is going to have some charges. Whenever we attack this enemy, anybody that's actually not full HP and attacks this enemy is going to get some healing done by consuming that debuff. So it's basically going to allow Judgment to actually transform itself into a little bit of a healing spell that is more important to use because it does have some healing component to it. However, it's still not warranting taking it or using it before some other holy power generation spells. So it makes Judgment a bit more important, but not so much. The other 2 spells we don't really going to be talking about because they're kind of whatever, especially for PvE. Now the next one is a CC row. Everything will be very situational and strong depending on what you want to be doing, but not too important for the core way of how Holy Paladin works. And here I want to mention Rule of Law as a very important spell when it comes to raiding in particular, because it's going to extend the range of our heals from 40 yards, I think it is all the way to 60 yards. So it's just going to allow us to cover even more range for a little while, as well as increase the value of our mastery. So if you didn't know, the way our mastery works is the closer we are to an ally, the more healing we're going to be doing to them, because we have this extra bonus on top of things. Now, if we are closer to this guy, we'll be doing some healing. We are even closer, we'll be doing more healing based on our mastery. So whenever we have Rule of Law active, this increase or healing increase is going to be even more increase. It's going to be increasing the benefit from this mastery for a little while. So basically, it's the only talent in this row that actually gives us some healing increase, and therefore is the one that we're going to be picking always whenever we are raiding, unless we really need some of the other ones, but the other ones will be very situational. When it comes to Mythic Plus, the value of Rule of Law is way less, and therefore we almost always pick Unbreakable Spirit. Next up, we have the slot machine part of the spec. We have Divine Purpose, which we are picking almost always, And what it does is whenever we use a spender, that being of course Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, or Shield of Righteous, we have a chance of being able to use another spender for free. It's a 50% chance of actually happening, so it's a bit of an RNG sort of thing, but it's pretty nice whenever you are able to just use one thing and then back to back use another Light of Dawn, for example. Now, this also interacts pretty well with Awakening, which is something that we're always picking nowadays as well. And what it does is it has also a 15% chance of, whenever we use a spender, in this case only Light of Dawn and Word of Glory, of proccing wings. So we can get some wings for free whenever we are using our healing spenders. We use this basically everything or everywhere, because the more wings, you can see there, I just proc them, and I just got also a proc of Divine Purpose, that being this little light up here. It's what indicates me that I got a Divine Purpose proc. It's basically just the more wings we have is basically all we want as a Holy Paladin. The more wings, the better. Now, let's not ignore other things over here. For example, Holy Avenger is going to increase the Holy Power generation. So it's basically going to triple it. So whenever we generate one Holy Power, instead we're going to be getting 3. That's going to make us be able to basically go onto a very big burst window. Whenever we just generate one Holy Power, we can immediately then use a spender because we already have 3 Holy Power. It's very strong. Nowadays, we don't pick it too much, but it's worth considering for many scenarios. And it's probably going to be very strong in the future, depending on many factors. Seraphine, also important to consider. This one consumes 3 Holy Power and gives us a lot of secondary stats for a couple seconds. Very useful if you're trying to do big damage. However, since it's consuming Holy Power instead of generating it, it doesn't usually get picked that much, because what we really need is the Holy Power to heal. And when we are wasting it, or rather investing it into a buff, it might be a little bit clunky. It's not exactly what we want in many scenarios. However, it's worth considering, especially when we are just looking to do big damage. These 2 other talents, don't even think about them nowadays. We don't pick them ever. And the final row, we already talked about Beacon of Faith. Beacon of Virtue, what it does is it replaces our beacons. And instead of having a permanent beacon, we have a buff, or rather, we have an ability that allows us to apply up to 4 beacons to random targets. We can only choose one target, and that is the target that we are using the ability on. So when we use it, you can see I applied 4 beacons, 1 onto this person, and then the other ones are being completely random. And we have these 4 beacons for a couple seconds. We don't have them forever. It's only going to last for a few seconds. They transfer healing the same way a normal beacon would, at a 50% rate, so it's stronger than a double beacon during the time window, because it doesn't have the diminishing returns of the double beacon that it reduces the healing transfer. But it, as I said, is a big bursty cooldown that we usually use whenever we have big healing paired up with it. We save up some big healing, we prepare for it, we apply the beacons, and then we dump the big healing, and we start pumping some big healing onto the people that got the beacon. We use this in plenty of PvE scenarios, but it has a hefty mana cost to it. It also removes your permanent beacon, which goes a long way in reducing the tank healing, and it can also be a little bit clunky. It takes some experience to be able to use Beacon of Virtue properly. And lastly, Glimmer of Light used to be very strong, and what it does is whenever we Holy Shock something, it's going to give them a debuff, and whenever we do use another Holy Shock afterwards, that debuff is going to be proccing some damage on them. If we use it on an ally instead, it's going to give them a buff, and whenever we use Holy Shock another time onto something else, it's going to proc some healing onto that ally based on the fact that they have Glimmer of Light. So basically you can have up to 8 glimmers active at once between all your allies and all your enemies. So this used to not be the case, and it used to be stronger, it used to do more healing, it used to be uncapped. So nowadays we barely ever use it because it's just not as strong. It just doesn't do that much more damage, or that much damage at healing, and it has a hard cap of only 8 targets, and therefore it's rarely ever used. Okay, so I think I talked about all the individual little things that a Holy Paladin, again, a base Holy Paladin, not covering any legendaries, any conduits, any soulbinds, any covenants, nothing of that, just the base Holy Paladin toolkit. I think I'm done here. I think I've covered what I wanted to talk about. Any questions, please let me know down in the comments. I'm here to help out, guys. Anything you want to know about it, I'll try to help you as best as I can. I also have plenty of gameplay videos if you're interested in specific little things or just want to see how the spec flows, plays, anything, just check out my other content. Again, if you want to know anything else, please drop them in the comments. I know I didn't cover everything, but there's just so much to talk. If you're interested in much more in-depth things, for example, on Mythic Plus, raiding, Necrolord, Benthir, stuff like that, I got other content in the channel, so check out that instead. And again, just let me know anything you might want to ask. I'm here to help. So yeah, I'm glad you watched the video. Then yeah, please drop a like, subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I'm also streaming on twitch.tv/midwayeu sometimes. You want to check me out playing some live keys or some raiding content, go ahead and check out that. And yeah, that's it for me guys today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.